That night still lives in the corners of my memory, like a soft shadow that never really leaves. I had spent the entire day in the kitchen, marinating the chicken the way my husband liked it, setting the dining table just right with fresh flowers, and even choosing my best scarf because I wanted everything to feel special. It wasn't a birthday, anniversary, or holiday, just a simple family dinner. But for me it meant something more. I had this little hope in my heart that maybe, just maybe, this evening could bring us all a little closer. We hadn't sat together like that in a long time. My husband had been distant lately, my children grown up and busy in their own lives, and my mother-in-law, well, she had always been difficult to please. So I wanted to try. I missed the sound of everyone laughing at the same table. I missed feeling like I belonged. Everyone arrived around 7 p.m. My husband's father, old but cheerful, greeted me warmly as always. My mother-in-law came in last, wearing her usual tight smile, the one that never really reached her eyes. She gave me a quick look up and down before heading to the living room. Nothing new. I brushed it off and went to check on the food. Dinner started like any other night. Some light conversations, a few polite laughs, and then suddenly I noticed her. My mother-in-law was whispering to someone in the kitchen. Her eyes were fixed on the dining table, particularly where my seat was. I couldn't hear her clearly, but something about her body language. It felt off. Her tone wasn't soft. It was sharp. As she walked back to the table, she carried 2 glasses of juice, one of which she placed right in front of me with a smile that made my skin crawl. I don't know what came over me at that moment, but just as I was about to take a sip, I paused. My father-in-law, seated next to me, reached for the glass closest to him, the one meant for me, and I gently pushed mine toward him instead. No reason, no thought. Just instinct. He took that glass and smiled at me like he always did, kindly, with warmth in his eyes. I watched him take a sip, still unsure why I had done what I did. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just tired and overthinking. But as I looked around the table, watching everyone laugh and eat, I couldn't help but feel like I didn't belong. I've spent 30 years in this house. 30 long years as a daughter-in-law. When I first came here as a young bride, I thought I was entering a second home. I had dreams of being welcomed like a daughter, dreams of love, respect, and togetherness. I was ready to give everything to this family, and I did. I cooked for them every single day without missing a meal, even when I was sick. I kept the home running when my husband lost his job. I stayed up with the kids when they had fever, taught them manners, helped them with their homework, and kissed them goodnight while my husband worked late. I never asked for anything. I thought love would come eventually. But from the beginning, my mother-in-law treated me like an outsider. No matter how much I tried, she always looked at me like I wasn't enough. I was either too quiet or too opinionated. If I dressed simply, I was boring. If I wore something nice, I was showing off. Her words were always wrapped in sweetness in front of others, but behind closed doors they cut deep. Even my little successes were questioned. When I started teaching part-time to help with the bills, she said, "Why are you working? Can't my son provide for you?" But when I didn't work, she said, "You sit at home all day doing nothing." I spent years trying to win her heart, baking her favorite sweets, folding her saris just the way she liked, quietly accepting blame just to keep peace in the house. But the truth is, I was never truly accepted. I smiled through it all, but deep inside I was slowly becoming invisible. I felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome in her own home. And yet, through all those years, I never raised my voice. I told myself she was just old-fashioned, maybe even misunderstood. But now, when I look back, I see it more clearly. Her hatred was never loud. It was silent, wrapped in sweetness. She didn't throw me out. She just slowly made sure I never felt like I truly belonged. There were always small, hurtful moments that I used to brush off as nothing. Like the time I made her favorite curry and she smiled, took a bite, then loudly said in front of everyone, "It's okay, but not like how I used to make it." Everyone laughed, even my husband. I laughed too, just to hide how much it stung. Or when guests would come over and she would take credit for meals I had spent hours preparing. She'd say, "Oh yes, I taught Amina everything she knows." And people believed her. She made sure to never insult me openly. No, she was smarter than that. Her words were like sugar mixed with a drop of poison, sweet to the ear but bitter to the heart. When I dressed up for festivals, she'd say, "You look nice, finally." If I was tired and skipped wearing makeup, she'd say, "Are you sick? You look pale." At family gatherings, she'd always introduce me as the one who married my son, instead of calling me her daughter-in-law with warmth. And when I tried to talk during conversations, she'd cut me off gently, like I had nothing important to say. The worst part was that nobody saw it. They all thought she was just being her usual self, harmless and honest. "She's just old," they'd say. "She says things without meaning them." But I knew better. I saw the way her eyes sparkled when I looked hurt. The way her fake kindness felt like a mask she wore only when others were watching. Now, after all this time, those little pieces are finally falling into place. I used to think I was imagining things. But that night, something in me woke up, and I began to realize, maybe she never wanted me here in the first place. The table was full, laughter, spoons clinking against plates, warm food being passed around. It looked like the perfect family evening from the outside. My children were talking about their day, my husband was joking with his brother, and my father-in-law, always cheerful, was telling a story from his younger days. Everything seemed normal, but inside I felt something wasn't right. I was still a little unsettled after seeing my mother-in-law whispering in the kitchen. I kept reminding myself not to overthink it, but my heart wouldn't stop pounding. She came back into the dining room holding 2 glasses of juice. That wasn't unusual. We often helped ourselves during dinner. But she came straight to me, leaned over with a smile and said, "Let me serve you personally tonight, Amina." That sentence, it echoed strangely in my mind. She had never done that before. Her voice was sweet, but her smile, it didn't feel right. She placed the glass directly in front of me, gently touching my shoulder. I forced a small smile and said thank you, trying not to let my discomfort show. I sat there for a few minutes, eating quietly, but I couldn't ignore it. Her eyes. She kept glancing at me from across the table, always returning to that glass. Once I caught her staring so hard that I paused with my spoon midair. She quickly looked away and started talking to someone else, but my gut was telling me something wasn't okay. I reached for the glass, my fingers wrapping around the cold surface. Just then my father-in-law chuckled at a joke my son made and reached for his drink, but his hand landed near mine instead. In that second, without thinking, I slid my glass toward him and picked up the one he almost took. It wasn't planned. It was a reflex. Something inside me just didn't feel right about drinking from the one she gave me. He took the glass with a smile and drank deeply, not noticing a thing. I sat there quietly, trying to calm my racing heart, convincing myself it was nothing. Just nerves maybe. Maybe I was reading too much into things. But deep inside I knew something had just shifted. I just didn't know how much. At first, everything seemed fine. My father-in-law finished his glass and went back to eating like nothing happened. I tried to focus on my plate, telling myself to breathe, to stop overthinking. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But not even 10 minutes had passed when I saw his hand tremble slightly while reaching for the salad bowl. He dropped his spoon. We all looked at him, thinking he might have just lost grip, but then he pressed his hand against his forehead and leaned back in his chair. "I'm feeling dizzy," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. Before anyone could react, he slumped to the side. Everything went silent. My husband jumped up. "Dad! Dad!" he shouted, shaking him. My children stood frozen, eyes wide with fear. My mother-in-law screamed his name, rushing to his side, pretending to be terrified, her voice cracking. But I just sat there, frozen. Felt like the world had slowed down. The colors in the room faded, and all I could hear was the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I watched them gather around him, trying to wake him, fanning his face, splashing water. Someone called an ambulance. I could barely move. I couldn't speak. My eyes went to the glass, the one I was supposed to drink. As the paramedics arrived and carried him out on a stretcher, everyone panicked. My husband was pacing. My children were crying. And my mother-in-law was sobbing loudly, holding her chest, acting like the world had collapsed. But I knew. I didn't have proof and I hadn't seen her do anything, but my instincts screamed that this wasn't just a medical issue. Something was wrong. Something she did. And I couldn't say it out loud. Not yet. I kept quiet, my mind spinning, heart breaking, unable to believe what had just happened. We spent the whole night in the hospital waiting room. No one spoke much. My husband was pacing back and forth, his face pale with worry. The children had been sent home with their uncle. My mother-in-law sat in a chair, her head buried in her hands, crying softly every now and then. But something about her tears didn't sit right with me. They felt too forced, too well-timed. Hours passed before the doctor finally came out. We all stood up at once. The doctor gave a tired smile. "He's stable now," he said. He's resting. But we had to run a few tests to figure out what happened. It wasn't just dizziness. I held my breath. There were traces of sleeping medication in his system, the doctor continued. High doses. Someone had to have slipped something into his drink. It wasn't accidental. The room went still. My husband looked shocked. Sleeping pills, he repeated. But why would anyone, who would do that? Everyone turned to each other in confusion. I glanced at my mother-in-law. She gasped loudly, covering her mouth, shaking her head. Oh God, no. This can't be. Who would do something so terrible? She said, tears rolling down her cheeks. But I watched her closely. Her performance was too perfect. The fear, the shock, it all felt practiced. My husband kept asking the doctor questions, but I couldn't hear anything anymore. My mind was racing. That glass. The way she brought it to me. The way she kept watching. And now this. It couldn't be a coincidence. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to accept that someone in my own home, someone I had respected for 30 years, could be capable of something so cruel. But in that moment, standing in the hospital hallway, I knew one thing for sure. Something was terribly wrong and I couldn't ignore it anymore. As I sat in the hospital waiting room trying to piece together everything that had happened, something clicked in my mind. I had a habit of recording family moments. Sometimes just small snippets of conversations during dinner, or the children laughing, or the clink of glasses. Simple things that felt important to me. I had left my phone on the dining table that evening with the voice recorder on, thinking it would capture the sound of everyone chatting over dinner. I'd almost forgotten about it in the chaos of everything that happened afterward. But as I sat there alone in the quiet hospital corridor, I realized I could check the recording. Maybe I would find something, anything, to help me understand what had just happened. I retrieved my phone from my purse and unlocked it. My fingers trembled as I hit the play button, the familiar sound of clinking cutlery and chatter filling the room. I heard my children's laughter, my husband's voice, and even my father-in-law's hearty chuckles. Everything seemed so normal, until I heard a soft whisper, almost too quiet to hear. I paused. My heart skipped. I rewound the audio and played it again, this time with my breath held. The whisper was unmistakable. Make sure she drinks it. The voice was clear. My mother-in-law's voice. My hands shook as I replayed the words over and over, each repetition sinking deeper into the pit of my stomach. She had done it. She had drugged my father-in-law. There was no question now. The truth was undeniable, right there in the voice recording. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to process everything. My heart raced, but at the same time I felt something else. A strange calmness. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to rush in and confront her immediately. No, I had to be smarter than that. I had to expose her, but in a way that would make her reveal herself fully. I would gather more evidence, wait for the right moment, and then take action. I would make sure she paid for what she had done. It felt strange, almost unreal. The woman who had always belittled me, judged me, and made me feel less than I was now stood revealed for who she truly was. A manipulator, a liar, and someone who would stop at nothing to control those around her. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. It wasn't long before I knew it was time. I couldn't sit in silence anymore, watching everything unfold without doing something. I knew this confrontation wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. I had the truth in my hands and it was time for everyone to hear it. I called for a family meeting. I didn't want anyone to suspect anything was amiss, so I made sure to keep my tone calm, even friendly. We need to talk, I said softly, and despite their initial hesitation, everyone agreed. We all gathered in the living room. My husband, my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and even the children, though I wasn't sure if they should be involved. But they needed to know too. They deserved to know the truth about their family. I sat in front of them, my hands steady as I placed my phone on the coffee table. I looked at my husband first. He still didn't understand what was going on. He was sitting there, his face etched with worry and confusion, probably wondering why I had called them all here so suddenly. But I couldn't explain it with words. No, I needed to show him. I pressed play on the recording. The room went still. The familiar sounds of the family dinner filled the air. Laughter, chatter, but then a sudden shift. The soft, unmistakable whisper came through the speakers. Make sure she drinks it. I watched their faces carefully. My mother-in-law's face went pale. Her eyes widened as she realized what was happening. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I could see the fear building in her chest, though she tried her best to keep it hidden behind a mask of calmness. But the real reaction came from my father-in-law. His face drained of color. His hands, which had been resting on his lap, clenched tightly. His eyes filled with disbelief. He couldn't look at anyone. Slowly, as if the weight of the truth had finally hit him, he turned to my mother-in-law. You did this?" His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of decades of trust shattering in an instant. "For all these years I trusted you. And you." My heart ached for him. He had been married to her for 40 years, and in that moment the woman he had loved, the woman he had built a life with, had become a stranger to him. I watched the pain in his eyes, the deep hurt that came with realizing he had been deceived all this time. There was silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than any words could. No one knew what to say. My husband looked at me, his mouth slightly open, his face full of confusion, anger, and betrayal. But it was nothing compared to the look my father-in-law gave his wife. The trust he had once placed in her was now broken beyond repair. And my mother-in-law? She couldn't speak. She could only sit there, exposed, caught in the act she had so carefully orchestrated. It was the moment everything changed, and the truth, though painful, was now out in the open. The room was thick with tension. My father-in-law, still recovering from the shock, slowly stood up from his chair. His hands shook as he took a deep breath. His eyes never left my mother-in-law, the woman he had shared his life with, the woman who had just been exposed for the cruel, manipulative person she truly was. "I'm done," he finally said, his voice steady but full of sorrow. "Amina, I trust you." I could feel my heart skip a beat, but I didn't show it. He was giving me control over the house, the property, everything. It was his way of saying he believed in me, and it was his way of acknowledging that my mother-in-law had destroyed everything. "I want you to take charge," he added, his voice cracking a little. This house, everything. I can't trust her anymore." My mother-in-law's face twisted in disbelief. She opened her mouth as if to protest, but then stopped herself, no doubt realizing that it was too late for apologies, too late for her usual manipulations. "You're not staying here anymore," my father-in-law said, his voice firm. "I'm asking you to leave. Now." Her face turned red, and for a moment, I saw the woman who had once been the domineering matriarch, trying to keep control of everything. But the tables had turned. I didn't need to add anything more. I didn't need to insult her. I didn't need to humiliate her. I simply stood up and walked away. It was all the dignity I needed. No words, no accusations, just quiet power. As I left the room, I could feel my father-in-law's gaze on me. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper, something real. The weight of all those years of betrayal lifted just a little. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had finally taken control of my life. My future. She was left in silence, unable to do anything to stop what had already begun. As I sit here now in this seat, the very one my mother-in-law always tried to claim as her own, I can't help but reflect on how far I've come. I never wanted revenge. Not really. What I wanted was respect. Acknowledgement. To be seen as more than just a daughter-in-law, more than just someone expected to do all the work, to give up everything while being taken for granted. I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to destroy her. But the poison she tried to give me, literally and figuratively, it never touched me. It didn't break me. It only opened my eyes. It showed me what I was capable of, what I truly deserved. Now I sit here in the same chair where she used to sit, looking around the dining room. It feels surreal. The house, the property, the respect. Everything is mine now. Not because I took it by force, but because I earned it. Because in the end I was stronger than her lies, stronger than her poison. I've learned something from all of this. That fate has a way of turning things around. She thought she could control everything, that she could push me out and take what was mine. But in the end, it was her own actions that led to her downfall. And now she's left with nothing but the truth, and that's the most powerful thing of all. She gave me poison to destroy me. But fate served her the truth in the same glass. I'm sitting here now not as someone's daughter-in-law, not as someone's servant, but as someone who took her power back. And that, in the end, is all I ever needed.